Hey, Jackie.
Hi.
Conversation to have with better people than you two, who are fabulous women organizers who I love dearly as people, who I'm proud to know as an organizer, and who I watch closely and who I actually learn a lot from. And this is a really interesting situation, right? Because I don't think we pay too much attention, especially we older organizers. And this is a thing that has been a stick in my craw for years, that we older organizers, and I'm 56, don't give a whole lot of credence sometimes to our younger organizers. And some of it is because we think we know everything. We older organizers, we have been through some things, but that does not mean that we know everything. So I am always wondering when I see fantastic young organizers, like, who is it that inspires them to get out in the streets and do this work, despite us sometimes, to be to be honest, despite the old heads sometimes, who we can kind of be a little bit of a stumbling block. But especially for young women, I find that to be really remarkable when women who have had such a hard time, just in general, in society in general, then want to get into organizing. And I wonder, and they experience like the ups and downs of organizing and everything that comes with it. And I always do wonder, who is inspiring these young women to put up with us and to continue in this work that is, I mean, it's desperately needed. We desperately need to organize, but organizing isn't easy for anyone. And I think it's particularly difficult for young Black women. So I wanted to hear from two young Black women who I think are fantastic. What is it? Who is inspiring y'all to be so dope? I mean, what is it that drives you both to do all that you do, sometimes with the feelings of not being supported, sometimes being misunderstood, or wanting to be shouted down by male comrades, and to kind of have your opinions poo-pooed sometimes. That still happens sometimes, because we've always got people coming into this movement. So let me stop editorializing and talking. And I want to ask Anye first, like, who is it among Black women that propels you to do this work? I mean, because you've got the bar, the pull-up bar in the window, which I can't do. And the hitting bag in the background. So I mean, for people who are not able to see this, but for you on Black Power Media, you can see it. You should not take Anya seriously. I mean, you should not take her lightly, rather. I meant to say, sorry about that. You should not take her lightly. And if you thought you could before, she's got a punching bag and a pull-up bar in her joint. So I wouldn't take her lightly if I were you. But Anya, what is it that drives you to do this work and to be so passionate and focused in it?
Yeah. Well, thank you for noticing the pull-up bar and the punching bag. I try to get my fitness on. If you ever met me in person, you also know that I'm big. I'm like 5'10", so don't fight me. It'll be serious.
You would lose. You would lose.
But anyway, so there's a lot of African women revolutionaries that I take a lot of inspiration from. Sada Shakur's biography I read very early on in my journey towards becoming politicized, and she writes with like such clarity, and she also like pulls no punches in terms of even like criticizing her own practice. Of course, criticizing the Black Panther Party. She's giving like a scientific socialist, revolutionary, pan-Africanist political analysis and very clear and accessible language. And the way that she grew up, the things that she experienced, even like the dudes she dealt with, like were very familiar, like very much resonated. So definitely was like an important point for me in terms of being politicized. But I think actually like the most impactful women that I have been inspired by have been the women within the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the All African Women's Revolutionary Union, because like what you explained about what it's like as a young African woman in the movement, how you get shouted down, how you get misunderstood, just like a bunch of hot nonsense. Like sometimes it's like you're just like, God damn, like it's just too much, and you just it just feels like overwhelming. And then just like looking to see the sisters around you, like the elder sisters that have been there before, who have also been through the same things, keeps you motivated. Like they're a source of like history, a source of strategy, a source of like support to be like, do you see this? And they're like, yeah. Like it's just extremely important to have that community. Like I didn't have non-dysfunctional elders until I joined the AAPRP, and I wasn't in like deep community with revolutionary African women until the AAPRP. And they're such like an essential support system. And they're so important in helping to understand like where the AAPRP is at and like where it needs to go. So definitely people like Nancy Wright, who I'm sure that y'all are very familiar with. She's in the DMV. People like Moya Mzuri, who is like one of my mentors within the AAPRP in the California chapter. Nahanda, another comrade in the California chapter. Mjiba in the Ghana chapter. Like, man, I would not have survived in revolutionary Pan-African organizing without like the women who fought for to make space for us and who are still fighting today to carry the organization forward, to carry the worldwide Pan-African movement forward. So there's like many historical revolutionaries I could name, like Asada, like Tina Cilia, like Carmen Pereira, like Winnie Mandela, like Veronica Sobukwe, who had a huge influence on me. But like the every single day influence is the woman of the APRP and the All African Women's Revolutionary Union.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, I recognize some of those women's names, but not others. And that just lets me know that I need to do more investigation into the women that are currently in organizations to get connected with them. Because I think the thing, Ricky, that I have learned the most in the time that I've been organizing with the Black Alliance for Peace, and then doing all of the other stuff that kind of came out of that, the thing I think I figured out that is the most important and helpful for me has been, I need to be around people not just who are like me, and certainly not people who will always, like big me up. Like every time I go to speak, oh, Jackie, you were wonderful. And I was like, okay, that's great. That's nice. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's warms my heart. But I need people I can trust who can pull my coattail and tell me where I misstepped, what I can do better, who can seriously sharpen me. And it seems like it's hard to get that from some brothers, because I understand the difficulty, the tension. You don't want to create a situation where things are uncomfortable or difficult. But if you're just looking to organize, I don't see why anything would be. But we know how things happen, right? So it's also, I think, Ricky, the difficulty sometimes that we women organizers have with being in community with some of our brothers. I think it's because of this long gender struggle that we have had, and I don't think we've really gotten to hammering a lot of it out until the younger generations came along. I think where we may have started some of those conversations previous decades, but we didn't really finish them. And I can't tell you why that is. I think it's a lot of the state coming in and destroying our movements and making our spaces unsafe for us to hash out our own things, because they come in and arrest us all. Um, but I still think in this new resurgence of organizing, I guess, I do see like a little bit of difficulty in being in community and trying to get trusted mentorship in some organizations with brothers and sisters. And I just think it's a really interesting phenomenon that I don't know that we have tackled those situations head on the way your generation has, Ricky. And who was it, or who is it, that drives you to be as unafraid in dealing with those issues? Because here you are, a woman, a young Black woman who is the coordinator of probably one of the most dynamic regions in BAP. And I've watched you do it, and I've seen you do it. Like, it's like breathing for you. And at the same time, I've seen you be unafraid in confronting these internal contradictions. You are usually the one who's at the forefront of pulling folks back and saying, hey, I think we can do a better job at handling this issue than we're doing right now. So who compels you to be that brave and unafraid to not just confront the contradictions in the world and the system that we're trying to destroy, but to confront the contradictions within our organizations, so that we can feel safe somewhere, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that before I was in an organization, those kind of struggles were always antagonistic.
Mm-hmm.
I recall once, in hindsight, it was to prove a point, but I thought I was doing something. I was tracking, the principal was murdered by her ex-husband in California, and I want to say this
Oh,
was 2014, 2015-ish,
yeah, I
maybe.
remember that.
But there were people online saying, well, that's just anecdotal. It's not a widespread epidemic or whatever. So I began to track each and every intra partner violence situation that led to death. And I just had a running thread of it on Twitter. And I would get constantly attacked, obviously, because I'm running a thread of, Black men killing their partners. And I always think about that in hindsight, because the way that I viewed the responses as reactionary, the reason why I even made that thread was reactionary too. There was no purpose for it. It wasn't like I was making this so that we can come up with solutions. I was just trying to be right.
Mm.
And I think that what organization has done was shown that there's a different way. Like, yes, these things could be true, but what is the objective here? Are we trying to be right, or are we trying to be free? And I think that is the dynamic that I approach these sort of conflicts with. And I would say that I have been lucky enough to have elder men within the organization that have been mentors to me as much as I've had elder women. Like, I've had a John and a Jaribu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's been a benefit. And I think a lot of the conflicts that I find myself in is my leadership, with people coming into the organization and not knowing what to do with a woman in leadership, and a woman in leadership in multiple fronts in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just men that have that issue. It's just the dynamics of patriarchy. I could say that just that poses an issue. Well, why does she get to do it? How come she gets to, And so that's just some of the things that you have to deal with. But I think that is how people are coming into organizations with a mindset, or maybe an idea of what organizing is and how to struggle around these issues. And because I'm very, as you name, I approach conflict, because I don't think, all struggle is not conflict, but we can't get through conflict without struggling.
Mm-hmm.
So because I am, I'm not conflict avoidant, that comes off a particular way, but I've learned not to be conflict avoidant, because the same elders that I named are not. Jaribu Hill is certainly not conflict
No,
avoidant.
not at
Right?
all. And
Yes,
Sharibu is fantastic because I told her about something that I would that happened to me, and she just out of nowhere, she was just like, oh, you have a legal claim, and you had better do this and this and a third. And I was like, so so I was just telling you this. She was like, no, you have a legal claim. I'm just getting to know her. And she's like, no, this is what you need to do to get some justice. And it is good to be surrounded by elders like that, who, first of all, want to listen to you. That's always nice. but who also care about you enough that they're going to give you the information you need to get what you need right then. And Jaribu was certainly like that. Ajamu was absolutely like that. No matter what he likes to say, he is he is a very gracious mentor, because he's mine too. And what you said a minute ago, though, Ricky, about people not dealing well with women in leadership. Onye, do you feel that's true also? Do you get those vibes that people just don't know how to deal? People coming into organization, trying to participate in the AARP study groups, trying to participate in the community garden, which is amazing, by the way. People just coming in, looking at the stuff that you all are doing and saying, I want to be a part of that. And then they come in and they see gorgeous Onyu at the mic. And what happens on you, Anya? Do they just like turn around and walk out? Do they, when you start talking and you obviously know what you're talking about, do they just like get flummoxed and like, oh, I can't take this? What's up with that?
I would say actually most of the time, people, you can definitely tell, depending on who it is, there's a particular kind of response. But one thing the political education process, like the work study process and the APRP does, is give you like, you're like, I know what I'm talking about and I know what to do. And when you have that kind of energy, people might feel a kind of way. Like sometimes dudes come in and they have like romantic intentions and it just becomes very clear very quickly it's not gonna happen. And so they just leave. But otherwise, like there might be the energy at first, but for the most part, they either get along with it or they dip. Like it's not really super destructive or disruptive. But what does happen a lot and is more destructive is that people will project onto you. And I know for a fact this happens to Erica too. I think it happens to like a lot of African women in leadership positions where all of their like internalized stuff about like the body you exist within like comes out in like extremely dysfunctional ways. And it turns into like interpersonal issues. It turns into like unprincipled behavior. It just becomes something that you're forced to deal with because it's so toxic. And so that is like more, it happens honestly like quite frequently, and it's honestly like really draining. So it's like the individual response, like I have the confidence and like the foundation thanks to like the APRP as an organization to deal with like whatever comes. But when it becomes like that like deep-seated projection and it's like sustained over a period of time, that's actually really common and really draining. And the only way that I found to like get through it is to like lean on the organizational structure. So it's like a collective problem and not just me having to deal with it.
Mm. Ricky, what do you think we need to do in organizing to finally, I guess, put a nail in the coffin of this issue of gender and gender oppression and the different ways that we ourselves are we're not comfortable in some women in leadership positions because we've never been supported to be in leadership positions, right? We've gone through that struggle and then we are in this organization and somebody sees something in us that we never see, right? And they're like, yeah, we want you to do this. And we may be thinking, oh, all I wanted to do was be on the communications committee and that's all I wanted to do. But no, a certain coordinator says, no, you should be the coordinator of a region. And okay, well, so some of us are fortunate in that we get a lot of support from people in organizations, from the senior organizers, from the younger organizers, from the people who we are organizing against, organizing with. But then for these young women who come in, and the young men too, who have never been in organization, who are still very much indoctrinated with societies and the world's understanding of gender roles the place of women, and men should be in leadership, and I can't be a leader because I'm a nurturing mother type figure, all the ways that nobody's going to listen to me, or I don't really understand this like other people do. How do we get people who come into our organizations, Ricky, from not only that area of still struggling with their self-esteem that a lot of women have in particular, and a lot of young men too, but how do we get them past those self-esteem issues, and also past the gender antagonisms that we bring with us, and transform that into a solid, efficient, powerful cohort of organizers, a cadre? How do you take these, these shriveling, trembling vehicles, vessels of just self-doubt and the lack of any real knowledge, no real politic, and turn people into like versions of these women on this screen, just with the amount of power and influence and passion that drives a movement? And yeah, I'm bigging y'all up a lot because it's true.
I was gonna say,
I think it's true.
I appreciate that, but I do think like the self-doubt, I don't think that ever really goes away. I think there's a what do they call it? I forget, where you feel like you're pretending to be a thing.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah, imposter syndrome. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think that really goes away. And I think the more visible
No.
that I become, and through agitation, because you have to kind of be visible when you agitate, the more I kind of feel that, right? And I'm always like, how did that sound? Did I say that right? Did that come off okay? How was that writing? Like Onye can tell you, they literally have to pull the paper out of my hand and publish it, because I'm always like going back and making edits and like because I'm never sure if I know what I'm talking about, because I've had so many instances where people challenge me just for the sake of challenging me, not because they know what they're saying, but because they don't necessarily want me to be the person saying it. So because I'm used to being challenged, I'm also kind of second guessing myself oftentimes. So I do appreciate things like you say, Sharice, also like that sort of support that I get from comrades, Onye, because that's what I think organization and just having comrades does, is, remind you, no, you did well. You know what you're saying. No, you weren't wrong, and I think you do need that kind of reminder, because this is a world that tells you that you can't do it, or you shouldn't be doing it, or you shouldn't have that position that you have, etc. And also, I feel like you have to work for these positions still, right? Nobody just hands you a leadership position. It's something that you have to earn. And even in that earning, there's a lot of self-doubt. But I think in terms of like the gender antagonisms, I think, well, Onye can actually speak to this. I would hope Onye speaks to this, because the party has done such a remarkable job, I think, in terms of PE and trying to struggle with that from the bottom up, and really unrooting the real issues, why people think away. But the approach I think that they take is remarkable, because I think the approach that the party takes is really useful. Because for me, I don't think that gender antagonisms is something that's just going to go away, even with PE. I think it's a base and superstructure kind of situation. Patriarchy is foundational in this nation, in this white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist nation. It is foundational. It is also a patriarchal nation. So I don't think without some sort of change in the structure or foundation will we have any real dynamic change and towards how we understand genders, how we understand struggling around issues of gender, or even approaching the issues of gender without antagonisms. Because I think we're all propagated in that way to uphold certain things, men and women. So I don't think that without a sort of reconstruction or revolution that we will have what we're asking for. Because you can see in socialist nations, while it's not solved, you could see the advancements are made so much easier because the base of the superstructure. so Nicaragua is an example of that. Cuba is an example of that, obviously. But I do think that intentional PE and people wanting to engage it in a good faith, principled way, really, and have those conversations and have those struggles. And sometimes voices get elevated, and we have to be okay with that. As long as we know the unity, there's an objective to these conversations, right? Not just for the sake of how they do it online with the random questions of, oh, if you see some man with $50 or some man who's educated, like those ridiculous what questions.
Yeah.
Again, that's not how we do it. But I think like intentional PE that has an objective to actually resolve these issues really moves the needle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Anya, pick up on that, please.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, we plug in Patriarchy work study process because it's like an intensive process political education that's mandatory for everybody in the organization. And we learn about like the material basis of patriarchy, of transphobia, ableism, ageism, like the way that like liberal white supremacist capitalist society deals with these contradictions is like on an individual basis. They'll be like, you individual man, check your privilege. You individual cis person, check your privilege. But they're not looking at like, where did that come from? What is the historical material foundation of these isms? And then until you understand that, you will never get how to actually change things. Like you have to transform the whole of society to change those interpersonal relations for good. The other thing that Erica laid out that I actually really, really agree with is like you in the revolutionary struggles where you see mass women's organization, you see a materially different relationship between the genders, like a very, very different expression of patriarchy. Like patriarchy still exists. It hasn't been wiped out, but it's extremely different from how it shows up in capitalist countries. One example is in Guinea-Bissau, where the PIGC waged an armed struggle against Portuguese colonialism, backed by NATO, won, defeated them. They have their women's wing, Urumu. In the top of the call, I mentioned Titina Celia, who was a leader, a revolutionary leader within the PIGC in Urumu, who was actually recruited when she was 18 years old, became a leader within the armed struggle, became a political leader within the revolutionary struggle for Guinea-Bissau, and was killed by Portuguese colonizers before she was 30 years old, but still made a huge impact on that nation's struggle. But she was not an outlier. This was a very young woman who was a political and military leader, but she was not an outlier. When we had our party congress in Guinea-Bissau last year, there were comrades in Urumu who were like 18, 19, 20 years old, who were like running the room, extremely politically clear. And the reason why she was not an outlier, the reason why women like her still exist today is because the PIGC and Urumu are mass organizations that have engaged in political organization, political education of the whole of Guinea-Bissau society and transformed it. So in the places where you see these mass women's organizations, you see a drastically weakened patriarchy. So really the key is political education and the mass organization of women. We need to build our power, build our analysis to transform our conditions.
I mean, political education has got to be my favorite thing on the planet. Second to maybe dialectical materialism. But I love some good PE. And, Ricky, do you find in the effort to organize the masses, and I don't want us to lose what Anya just said about the PAIGC educating all of Guinea-Bissau society, including the women. And I remember reading Thomas Sankara's speech to women on Women's Day, and it was just like, do you think we have done an effective enough job, Ricky, at connecting the way revolutionary Pan-African male leaders have made the effort to turn gender patriarchy on its head when they were liberating their people in their countries? Do you think we've done enough? Do we think we've done a good enough job in connecting their efforts to address the issue of patriarchy and the oppression of women to the work that we're continuing to do? Do we talk about our our revolutionary elders work in this area enough, do you think? Or do we just keep focusing on these male leaders who really didn't say anything about the role of women, but they really did? It's just that we don't talk about them.
No, I don't think we do enough. I mean, in the last 3 or 4 years is when I came across Secretary's writing about women, which I highly recommend. And then even in the last 5 years, just as only a name, with the PAIGC and understanding those struggles, which I think is really important because it changed the dynamics of how I even understood this gender struggle, if you will, because they understood primary contradictions, and they understood the place for secondary contradictions. And they understood that while men were not the enemy, patriarchy was, just as they understood Portuguese people were not the enemy, but imperialism being brought out, colonialism of Portugal was the direct enemy. And I think understanding those dynamics really help push a better or even a different understanding of how do we wage war against this particular struggle, or war against patriarchy. Like, how do we really combat this issue? And just to Onye's point, without understanding the material conditions of these issues, or why, or the root causes, or why they exist, we really can't move into combating it. We'll just be doing the same regular Twitter debates, the radical feminists against the Black male studies, and we'll just do that circular thing until the end of time, where people could just really see that it's not about individuals, it's about structures and systems, and what upholds those structures and systems, and to what's benefit. And I think with the sort of degradation of Pan-Africanism that we've been seeing lately, where people are saying that it doesn't work, or Pan-Africanism has failed, we have sort of looked away from these Pan-African figures, right? Not just revolutionary leaders, but people who were truly invested in revolutionary Pan-Africanism and seeing a one united socialist Africa, or one united Africa under scientific socialism. And because of that, their interpretations of gender and their interpretations of struggle were based on a sort of material basis, and they moved differently, and they spoke about women differently because they understood the concept of the society as a whole, the restructuring of a society as a whole, and then even thinking about women in such a way, and understanding that a whole woman makes a whole child grows up to be a whole person. This is how we create whole societies. So to prioritize women in that way is, or at least was, with the understanding of needing to have a functional and chained society. And one cannot do that so long as you continue to oppress women. And having that clear understanding and wanting to change society and not adhere to this sort of capitalist one that we're living in really shifts the context of how we're even having these discussions around women and gender and antagonisms.
Excuse me. There are a couple of issues that were brought up. A couple of people asked me, please ask. So yes, okay, I will. So we've been talking about patriarchy on this International Women's Day, right? And that's like the thing we are all fighting against, women all over the world. It's patriarchy, and it's imperialism, and it's capitalism, and it's whatever ism that comes with capitalism, imperialism. And that's all of the isms, right? It's racism, it's sexism, it's ageism, it's disabled, it's ableism, right? It's all of the isms that come along with capitalism and imperialism needing a population of people to exploit, to make money off of. So for people, Anya, who don't understand what patriarchy is, and I have to remember all the time as an organizer that I cannot assume that everybody is working with the same understanding or definition of what's actually going on. So when we are talking about patriarchy, Anya, what is it we are talking about?
So patriarchy is a social system in which folks gendered as men primarily hold power and influence through political, religious, economic, and social means. And it's really important to understand that when we say it's a system where men tend to have control, it does not mean that men are not also exploited within those systems. Patriarchy has class contradictions, just like any other system of oppression, which means that the men that tend to hold the power in the system as a whole tend to be like ruling class men, tend to be like European men or Western men, what have you. But within like society, within households, within like the broader social structure, men tend to have dominance. Is that a good definition?
I think that's a good definition. And for me, it dispels the idea that Black men are the white men of Black people, or Black men are the police of white people, or whatever it was that came out of that mess. So Ricky, now that people have a working definition of patriarchy, what is it that we Black women organizers are trying to build that is opposite of that? What is the alternative? If patriarchy is so terrible, because these are the questions people ask, and I don't like to dismiss or poo-poo, people's questions, because I don't always like to assume that people are being disingenuous when they ask what seems like a silly or an antagonistic question. Now, sometimes people do intentionally like ask organizers who were speaking, and sometimes yes, people just ask us really silly things. And as much as I would like to respond with what I am thinking, because I am part of an organization, I've learned to be disciplined and respond with the politics instead of what's going on in my head, which none of those words I'm able to say on the radio. So Ricky, what is it that we want to build? If patriarchy is so terrible, what is it that we Black women are thinking we are building that's going to be better than patriarchy?
That's a really good question. Because I understand that there also exist certain structures that uphold patriarchy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about wanting to rid ourselves of patriarchy as a structure and a system, we have to also consider, well, what's upholding it that makes it, sustain, that makes it validate, that gives it validation. And when we think about the capitalism and imperialism and how those structures and systems are wielded around the world, and who benefits from that but ruling class men in power, then we have to think about a societal shift. And so the alternative is more than dreaming up new worlds, but really actively building one. So what does that look like? It does look like struggling and having these intense conversations around gender, having intensive political education, really getting people to understand the dynamics, the definitions, how these things play out, making sure there's a mass understanding so that we can combat it. I think one of the things that Onye had noted when we were at the Black Radical conference, organizer conference last year, and Onye did a workshop. And one of the things that they talked about was how the difference between how Cuba has come into their family law and laws around particular things, and the way that the US comes into laws. And a lot of what the US does is, sure, we can say that these are progressive laws, like, same-sex marriage and gender equality and abortion rights. But they're just laws that they enact without ever bothering to educate the masses of people. So obviously that's going to bring a sort of rejection of that, right? Because people are going to reject what they do not know, what they do not understand. And there's no effort and no sincere effort or campaign to really engage people in what is it to be transphobic? What does it mean to be what does patriarchy mean? What do we mean when we say those things? What do we mean when we say abortion is a healthcare issue?
Mm-hmm.
And these are not any concerted efforts into educating a population, so that when we're given these sort of progressive rights, they're rejected or they're fought against. And when you look at Cuba or you look at Nicaragua, like I always tell people, especially in terms of abortion, because that's one of the things that they always want to throw back at me, right? Well, if Nicaragua is such a progressive and socialist place, why does abortion look this way? And I always say, well, it only looks this way now. They are right now in a concerted effort to organize block by block around this issue for people who think a particular way about abortion, because it is a Catholic state, it's a Catholic country. But they also don't understand it in terms of this equating to being a medical issue for women. So now they have this sort of they teach gender studies from kindergarten up now, so that they can enact the society into learning about these things and understanding these things differently, so that when a referendum comes up again, people are better educated, they understand it more, and they can make an educated decision about moving forward around these certain things. And I think when we talk about what are Black women, what are the alternatives for Black women, I can't think of that, or I can't have an answer for that directly without thinking about, well, how do we even build that alternative? What does the building process look like? So before I even think about, well, what is it? What does that, what we want look like? What is the objective? I'm always thinking about, well, what does it take to build that, and start from there.
Yeah, that's absolutely real. And I love how, because we because we tried to be because we're honest in our assessment, as much as we are passionate about what we're doing, we don't have every single answer. Nobody knows what a socialist society will look like in the United States of America. We want that, and we may even change the name of this place. But until we get to that point, we have to work on some other things along the way. And while we're doing that, we're dismantling one wretched system. We're thinking about how to start building the other wretched system. And we're relying on our institutional knowledge, our organizational knowledge, and our knowledge of history. Our knowledge of history, of revolution, of women and men who fomented revolution, what they built, what they did, what it looks like. It may not look the exact same here, but we have plenty of information to draw on, so that we're not feeling like we don't know if we're working toward anything reasonable. We know that we're working towards something tangible. It's tangible in other places in the world. It's just not here yet, but we're working on it. And that's the important part. So real quick, we have an announcement tomorrow. March 9th is the International Coalition to Stop Genocide in Palestine's Day of a global fasting in solidarity with the people of Gaza who are being starved by Israel. The Black Alliance for Peace is one of the founding organizations of this coalition, and they're asking for everyone to fast tomorrow on March 9th, and with the money that you would have spent on food, to donate that money just from that day to the United Agricultural Workers Committee Aid for Palestine Relief Group. And I'm going to drop the link to the organization and the details in the chat for you, so you can have the link for folks who are watching on Black Power Media. I've dropped the information in the chat for you. For folks listening on WPFW, you can donate to the UAWC, the United Agricultural Workers Committee Aid for Palestine Relief Group, at the website https //UAWC PAL.org/donate now. Again, that's UAWC PAL.org/donate now. And that's for tomorrow's Global Day of Fasting in solidarity with the people of Gaza. We really do hope that you will participate in this action. And it would be great if you do, if you would just make a little sign and take a picture of yourself, or take a little video saying that you're participating in this action in solidarity with Palestine. Post it to social media, tag tag BAP, the ICSGP, and your Palestinian groups. Let's do all we can to support Palestine, and that's Day of Fasting for tomorrow. So today's day of recognizing International Women's Day here at the station, Anya and Ricky, it's focused also on culture, women culture and resistance. And I think, and I'm so glad I read Amilcar Cabral's writings on culture and revolution, because I always thought, you know, growing up in church, that music has this power that is almost, you can't quite put your hand on how it moves people the way you do. And I used to think that was only church music, right? Only church music moves people like that because everybody wants to be saved by Jesus. That's not. It's just music in general. I'm certainly not trying to insult people of faith because I am a Christian myself. So, but I mean, music itself has an incredible impact on people in general, not just music, but all art forms, painting, poetry, um, everything, culture. And then there's the idea that culture is not just music and artsy things, but culture is a much bigger thing than just those things that we enjoy doing or participating in. So, Anya, for you, what does culture mean for Black women organizing in the struggle, particularly in the act of resistance? How does culture play a part in how you are resisting?
I really love that you reference National Liberation and Culture by Amilcar Cabral, because I feel like he lays out in that speech like the critical importance of culture to African and other colonized people. There's a part, and I'm gonna paraphrase probably poorly, but you'll get the gist. There's a part where he says like the how different the oppressed nation's culture is from their oppressor is like a measure of how strong their resistance will be, meaning that our culture that we embody, that we practice, has to be radically different from the
Mm,
imperialist culture, from the colonizer's culture. And part of the process of colonization, the project of colonization, is to forcibly erase our culture, violently erase our culture, and forcibly assimilate us into theirs. And I feel like when we think about what's called Black culture, particularly in the US today, it's not ours. It's
mm,
got very little to do with us. It is
mhm,
completely captured by the enemy, which is why the legacy of African music making, of African poetry, of African dance that we see expressed through mediums like R&B and hip hop, the lyrics are antisocial, anti-woman,
mm,
anti-life. They
mhm.
are materialistic. They are based on consumption and violence, to be quite honest. And it's like really, really normalized. Like there was like this TikTok going around with like the little penguins dancing across the bottom of the screen, and people would do a dance. And like the song that was playing in the background was about like drugging a woman and like running a train on her. Excuse me, but maybe
Wow.
that wasn't good for the radio. But I was just like, whoa, like it was like wildly popular, and people were all doing the dance. And I was like, did we hear the song? Holy crap! It was like a good rhythm, but it was wild. But that is what our culture has been like mutated into
Mhm,
because of our exposure to the colonizer. And so I think that we as African people, like a very, very important part of our strategy for liberation is reclaiming like the humanistic and resistance-based aspects of our culture, recognizing that we are not of them. We are not American. We are not Western. We are African. We are humanistic. We are collective. We are about our connection to life and nature and land. Like it's not about consumption. It's not about exploitation. It's not about growth for the sake of growth. It's about our connection to each other and to this planet. And so I feel like what is held up as our culture is not ours, but we can always take it back. And that is key to our revolutionary struggle.
mm. And Ricky, how do we do that? How do we we've got 5 minutes left. How do we take back our actual culture, particularly as African women? How do we take back our culture and apply it to our struggle to continue to struggle for freedom?
Yeah, well, I think to Onye's point, there has been a redefining of what even Black culture is. And I think one of the primary issues is Black culture as
Mm,
African people. I think that sort of disconnect from understanding ourselves as African is part and parcel of of many of the reasons why the culture has been stripped from us. because a lot of what we deem cultural is aspects of Africa anyway. We talk about the music, we're thinking about the dancing and things like that. Those are all aspects of things that connect us and tie us to a land. And so long as we are disconnected from understanding ourselves as African people, politically or otherwise, then yeah, our culture is up for grabs, and we're seeing that. There was a time when for the Black arts movement was considered the backbone, right, of that revolutionary period, even anti-colonial struggles. But today we see that because of the neoliberal turn, that sort of advocates for individualism, that advocates for paying Black women more without really ever considering what is the dynamics of the classes of Black women, what's even happening with working class Black women, the fight for 15, etc. So I think just reevaluating what we mean when we say these words, and also go back and fetch, just actually learning and studying the histories of how we even came to understanding a culture, or how we weaponized or utilized our culture to the betterment of our liberation would be the first steps.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining me, Ricky and Onyesanwu. This thing that we do every year when we celebrate women, we've got National Women's History Month now, in an imperialist capitalist system that exploits women, so that Black women in particular are facing triple oppression, and other groups of women are oppressed all of the time, every day. Immigrant women, Muslim women, under the new the resurgence of Islamophobia now that is a part of this cheering on genocide in Palestine, because you do realize that's what it is. It's just people have been conditioned to hate Muslims, so they don't care that the people in Palestine are being slaughtered. So that's that thing. And there's so much going on that people are fighting for. Don't ever forget that the people who are fighting, usually on the front lines in all of these struggles, from Palestine to the Congo to Peru, are a lot of women. A lot of women who are fighting for a better life and a better society, for not necessarily for themselves, but for their children, for their children to come, generations to come. They don't want to continue to raise families in the unequal, unfair, abusive, oppressive societies that they live in. And they understand, most women around the world understand, that our enemy is a singular enemy of US capitalism and US imperialism and their European friends. So we are in a struggle, we women, for the liberation of our families and our people. We are in an international, global struggle, we women are. And yeah, women do hold up half the world. And what are we doing with the other arm? We fight. That's what we're doing. So thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Darker Than Blue here on WPFW 89.3 in Washington, D.C. I'm Jackie Luqman. Sean Blackman will be back with us next week. And until then, you all, thank you very much for listening. Y'all on Black Power Media, y'all stay tuned. Y'all got a treat. Until then, until next time, everybody on WPFW, thank you for having us. And we'll see you next week. Peace.
Peace.
All right, y'all, we have returned. I'm so glad you enjoyed that episode of Darker Than Blue, WPFW 89.3, Washington, D.C. Excuse me, sorry about that. Woo. I'm going to figure out one of these days how to get the other title screen in between the two shows, but yeah, let's not waste any more time because this is a really fantastic conversation. I have been a reader and a contributor to Hood Communist for it's been a couple years, and for as long as Hood Communist has been around. And I got to tell you, if you're not reading Hood Communist, what are you doing? If you're not reading Hood Communist, if you're not reading Black Agenda Report, what are you doing with your life? Why are we friends? I don't understand. So the people responsible for Hood Communist are some of the sharpest folks I have met ever in my organizing life. And I just want to tell you, I don't just like randomly compliment people because I don't like people that much. So, so when I am impressed by somebody, you should probably be impressed by them too. So let me stop messing around enough talking from me. Onyesanwu Chatoye, Ricky, Ryan, and Musa. Musa Springer. Hi, Musa. Uh-oh. Are you muted?
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Okay, yes, yes.
I said,
Y'all are
hey,
just gonna have
Jackie.
to excuse me because I haven't seen Musa for, has it been 2 years?
I think almost, yeah, 2 to 3 years. The last time in person was when I lived in DC, which was like 3 years ago. So definitely a while.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In a weird way, this is very weird. I almost feel like I don't have any children, never had any children, never wanted to have children. I almost feel like these three folks are almost my kids. They're just, I just love them so much. They are so, if I were to have kids, I would hope I could get them to turn out like them. So that's but this is the editorial board of Hood Communist. All of that brilliance comes from people who contribute to these folks with their guidance, and they just did something that was they got to participate in something that was a great honor, and I'm going to stop because I can't give it the justice it deserves. So, what did you all just do?
Musa, you start because me and Erica were just talking for a long
Oh, okay, yeah,
Right.
that's
We
true.
did a
Oh,
whole
yeah,
hour.
Musa, what'd you guys just do? Now we let the boys in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that introduction, Jackie. And I want to also remind everybody, we also have two other editors, Salifu and Ajamu as well. They're on different time zones, and we're all busy, but we just want to make sure everyone too is it's ran by a lot of different people. I'm also the newest editor to the Hood Communist editorial collective. So I just have the wonderful revolutionary foundation that was already laid before me by these two wonderful sisters right here that I'm building on, and we're all working together with them. With that, Hood Communist was invited to attend, and excuse me, it has a long name, the International Meeting of Theoretical Publications of Left Parties and Movements. This was in Havana, Cuba, last month in February, around the 12th. And the three of us got to go and represent Hood Communist. And it was really beautiful and amazing because there were over 37 different countries represented there. And I believe it was between 200 to 300 people in total that attended the conference. And so we were really in a room full of other really revolutionary, radical media workers, communicators, organizers, as well as some more, I guess, politician type folks as well, like the president of Cuba. We got to ground and meet with revolutionaries from Zimbabwe, from Ireland, who were very funny and have great humor, Vietnam, Russia, Cuba. The event itself was planned by the Communist Party of Cuba. It was despite the blockade and the economic situation they're currently struggling within. The event was flawless and organized so well. And so I'll leave it there and see if either of Ricky or Onye want to add anything to that.
I think you broke it down perfectly. The only other thing I add is that it was almost like two trips in one, because we were in the conference space representing the communists, being able to like engage in struggle and conversation with revolutionaries and anti-imperialists from all over the world. And then thanks to Musa, who works with the Red Barrial Afrodescendiente, we were like in the hood with Africans in Havana, sitting in their living rooms, like eating with them, kicking it. We brought material aid. Erica did brought books for liberation through reading. So there was like two very different, but like very intersected trips in one very short delegation.
Wow. Wow. That is quite an honor. And first I want to, because you told a story about something that happened, Ricky, at the conference when someone said something out of right field this time about Israel and Palestine. What happened?
Yeah, well, it was a 3-day conference. It was the last day of the conference, and I think it was really primarily focused on youth that day.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the speakers, because we all got to either present something that we had already written, or we can write our names down and then speak to whatever the topic was that day. And this person is uh, from Europe, and they were talking, and we all have headsets on, primarily because it's a multiple languages. Like Musa just listed how many different countries we interacted with, so we all have headsets on, and also at the time, we're also writing what we're going to present. So we're all three of us are in that document at the same time as this person is speaking. So I didn't really hear it at first. But as I'm starting to hear something that sounds off, because I'm hearing words like Israel has the right to exist and things like that. And I turned to Onye, and Onye's making this face like, no. So I stood up. I stood up and I started looking around the room because I'm trying to figure out who is saying
who is this?
Yeah, in this room of all places, like of all the places to make that statement and to be that bold as an individual, right? And then we all make eyes with the Palestinian cohorts that were there. They had some students that were living in Cuba, and then they had some representatives also from Palestine, and we're all looking at each other like, what the fuck is this? And then OJ just yells out, Viva Palestina! And the whole shit just took off. Like everybody starts cheering because he said from the river to the sea was like a call for genocide or some nonsense like that. So we all start chanting from the river to the sea. It was like 300 plus people and that one guy. But it was like, that was really bold to do. And then you just seen everyone just running up to sign their names up to say something. And then every other speaker, and if you notice on the thing that I presented about the youth at the very end, we're like, and Palestine will be free. I mean, it literally had nothing to do with what we were saying, but we squeezed it in there. Right. We wanted the emphasis that Palestine will be free and we're not listening to shit you're saying. And that was just every speaker after that, especially Zimbabwe. So it was really great to see it was really great to see us as an African cohort and then the Africans from Zimbabwe in like direct solidarity with the Palestinians as well.
I can see the Zimbabweans like, how did the Zionists get in here? They came all the way to Cuba for this. No, let us stop this. But I thought that story is obviously funny, but it's important at this moment in time for organizers. We have to be on our guard all the time. I mean, there used to be a time when, I could roll up in somewhere and talk shit to the empire and everybody in the audience, yeah, and gone home. And that's not the atmosphere out there anymore. Any of us who are open supporters of Palestine and Palestinian solidarity and freedom, we are targets now, and that's just, and we have to be ready for that wherever we go, even among our people. Because I've had a couple conversations with some of our folks the past week that's been like, take me back to the hospital and do the surgery again so I don't have to deal with this anymore because this is stupid. But anyway, we'll talk about that later on. So after that, and you mentioned, Musa, that President Diaz-Canel was there. And that's the cool thing about Cuba that I kind of learned myself, like, when you go to an event in Cuba, if you're on a delegation or if you've been invited as a part of an organization, you're going to be in the same room with the president of Cuba. And it's wild to me because when you're there, he's a guy, right? Diaz-Canel does not, he's not like American politicians. He doesn't have that air. He doesn't have a bunch of security around him, keeping him away from the people. He's always with it. It's very weird. It's a very weird kind of, and it really is like, because I was on the May Day delegation in 22. I think that was the first year they had the May Day parade since COVID shut everything down. And Diaz-Canal, he's in the meeting in the one of the conference building, and he's just standing there on stage, and I'm looking for security. I am looking for the people with the earpieces and the thing, and they're just not there. And people are just walking up to the man, and I'm like, what in the world is this? What kind of government is this? They just let their president out like that, to let people touch him and stuff. But that is the difference between living in a country where the people have power and input into the government compared to here and whatever it is we do here. So, I mean, what is that like? What was that like for you all? I know this was not the first time you all have been to Cuba, but I think I'm beginning to think every time is different. So what was it like for you all this time to be in the same room with Diaz-Canal talking about something that nobody in this country talks about, reading?
Yeah, I just want to say it's actually true, and this is also true for Fidel when he was alive, that you can and it was also true when I met Nicolas Maduro when I went to the delegation to Venezuela. Like you can talk to them, and with Ortega as well. You can talk to them, you can interact with them. Like no one's giving you the sharp elbow. Like you can get up and be person to person with them. However, let's be clear. They do be having security. They're not.
They do. They do. Well, so they're smart. You don't know. You can't tell their security.
They have, you can tell because they're wearing the traditional Cuban short. I think it's called guayab or something like that. But they're all it's because they have bulletproof vests on, and usually you can tell that he's gonna come. That was I think the third time that I had been in Cuba, and he showed up at a meeting. You can tell that he's gonna come because you start seeing these kind of these swole dudes with the bulky shirt, kind of just
the casual.
Serious. But otherwise, there's not they didn't do bag checks. They weren't keep this much distance away. People were able to take a picture with him and talk to him, and that's always how it is, and that's how it is in Venezuela, how it is in Nicaragua, and it's exactly what you said, that the U.S. president needs constant protection because the U.S. is constantly destroying other countries, destroying and exploiting its own citizens. People got issues with the U.S. president, and they're always waiting for their chance. Whereas Cuba, sends doctors, not bombs around the world, so they don't have to worry about those kind of things. They have to worry about the United States. But yeah, it's just always the first time I had ever interacted with Diaz-Canal is with the Vencedemos Brigade, and what Cubans usually do is they'll tell you 5 minutes before you got to speak that you have to speak. And so that's what happened. I had to give a speech in front of the president, and we did pretty well. It was collectively written, but he has a clarity of analysis and a way of expressing himself that is very, very accessible, very, very easy to understand, and also extremely it's the way that Biden talks, the way compared Diaz-Canal talks. Diaz-Canal knows what's going on in the world and knows why it's happening, understands the U.S. better than anyone living in the U.S. And Biden just gets up there and lies and spins bullshit and just it's just talking in platitudes. It's so the difference in the clarity of what they're saying and the analysis is so night and day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was laughing when you were talking about the security because we were in a lunch break. So everyone had to vacate the room. And when it was time to come back in, me and Erica were running late because I was trying to get a cup of coffee and we didn't know or realize what was happening. Anya was ahead of the curve. Anya knew what was, but I had a whole glass of hot coffee and they were like, you need to chug it. You just got to drink it real fast.
They were like, hurry up, finish that coffee. We're like, wait, it's hot.
Drink it quickly, comrades. Drink it quickly.
Yeah, and like we've all mentioned, I think the process of us collectively writing what we were going to say was organic, but it was also very, very principled because we struggled even quietly in whispers in the middle of this session. We struggled around what we were going to say because we all took it very seriously. And I was not prepared to be one of the first ones to speak after Diaz-Canal came in the room and got a standing ovation. And then I would think I was
No
like,
pressure.
you know, I was the second one to go. But I also think that you said it's different every time, and that's absolutely true. With the Red Barrial Afro-Descendiente, I'm the international youth representative. And so I've brought several small groups from the US South to meet with organizers in Cuba. And it's different, and really it's more difficult every single time, because the blockade has literally just twisted the knife more and more. And then with Trump adding Cuba to the state sponsor of terrorism list and Biden continuing that, you have to be extremely flexible when you travel to Cuba, especially on a delegation where you're in charge of people, because it's extremely hard to live in Cuba right now, let alone be someone like us traveling there in solidarity with suitcases full of donations for people.
Yeah. Excuse me. So I want to ask you guys, what was the purpose of this conference? Because this conference itself was very interesting to me, because obviously people in this, that kind of thing doesn't happen in this country. So what was the purpose of this country, of this conference, and why was it so important that Cuba did this?
So the purpose of the conference, it was the second of its kind. It was a gathering of publications put out by leftists and anti-imperialist political parties and organizations. I would say like the majority of the delegates there represented like communist parties in assorted countries. And it was basically a space where they were like, we're all fighting against the same enemy, the global system of imperialism. We have many different political tendencies. We have to find the things that unify us, move past the divisions and the sectarianism, and come up with like a shared, coherent, collective strategy to take on global imperialism using our assorted media platforms. The other thing that was really discussed quite a bit was the role of youth. Like one thing that I keep thinking about that was discussed is like the imperialist tactic of the color revolution. Well, they'll use Twitter to start like a so-called grassroots movement in a targeted country that the grassroots movement is itself like completely backed by imperialism. And so they were talking about how that phenomenon is unfolding all over the world, and how because social media is like such a primary tool to like popularize it, a lot of youth get sucked into it. Like it's actually happening right now where people are saying free Palestine and they're throwing the Uyghurs in there because it's like trending on social media. So like so they were like the youth have like a lot of like momentum, a lot of passion, a lot of energy to carry out mobilizations, but they're being mobilized in support of imperialist tactics. Like, what do we do? So those are two of the main things that I took away. But what about you, Erica and Musa?
Sorry, I'm mothering at the same time, so I'm trying to quietly give directions to get out of here. Yeah, a lot of that. I think one of the highlights, or one of the things that were repeated often, was the concept of the battle of ideas, Fidel's battle of ideas, and really understanding that. And Jackie, you know, we've talked about that often in Black Alliance for Peace, that this is something that we're really trying to get serious about, because there is an influx of sort of backwards ideas, or ideas that are antagonistic towards materialism and such. So I think those are the things that we're seeing get picked up in social media spaces. These sort of elusive, idealistic ideas and concepts that don't have any particular conclusion, that are really driving people online to make certain remarks or have certain perspectives, i.e. the abolition movement in all states are bad, and how that has sort of reverberating effects globally when we look at countries like Iran or Cuba or Nicaragua, like the type, or Venezuela, Zimbabwe, etc. The intensity of the U.S. towards these nations, primarily because they are nation states, it gets picked up by so-called organizers or radicals who are learning these things and learning these concepts and learning this history through hashtags. Or through, 2-minute TikTok videos, and are then crowning themselves as teachers or organizers or activists, you know, and spreading that message and never having to really study. And I think to Onye's point, one of the things that was said, especially today when we talked about the youth and some of the commentary that was given, was how widespread that is and how so many of us, both as organizers and as people who are media entity or who run media entities, are struggling around that. Like, how do we recapture the youth? Because it's easy for people to say, well, the youth are only learning in these short intervals, right? They can only learn through TikTok and these little short mediums. But nobody's really engaging things like literacy campaigns and things like that, or strategically. And I think to Onye's point too, unity as a strategic weapon against all of this is something that they really upheld too, because we could all have said that or had our criticisms about the way that social media is being used, but it's one thing to have individual criticisms of this coming from different entities. It's quite another to build a strategic coalition of media entities that would combat these things. And that was a lot of what was discussed there that I thought was really valuable, that I hope kind of plays out in what was written and what we were able to also add to the conversation as well.
Yeah. And just, you know, to add on to that, when it comes to discussing like the battle of ideas, Fidel, there's so many speeches of Fidel's that really can ground us in what that means. And there's a quote of his that he gave in 1999 where he says, "We have had to wage and will have to continue waging a more difficult battle against that extremely powerful empire, a ceaseless ideological battle." And I think that Cuba is the perfect place for this type of international conference to take place, because Cuba has been the revolutionary example of what it means to be a net positive for the world, but for 65 plus years have to face a ceaseless ideological battle. And so just based on that alone, and like Erica and Onye said, all of us being there arrived understanding the primary contradiction is US imperialism. We didn't have to jump through any hurdles or barriers to all arrive at that place and waste time there. We were like, we're all here. We might have different approaches or whatever, you know, there's 37 plus countries represented, but let's be strategic and talk about how we together can align and can coordinate very strategic campaigns and propaganda, counter propaganda, and all of these things of our own. And then I think the other part is, of course, with the backdrop of what was happening in Palestine, particularly Gaza, we had a very, very strong Palestinian contingent of like 5 or 6, I think 6 Palestinians. And the idea of international solidarity was not just like a platitude. It was really grounded in like, we're here, we are media workers of various kinds. What are we going to do? It wasn't like, can we all, you know, write a flowery statement or something like that. And one of the Palestinians who spoke, all of them, when they spoke, it was almost dead silence because they were all incredible. But one of them was a medical student at Elam, the Latin American medical school that has trained hundreds of Palestinian doctors for free. And he said, myself and my 2 other comrades here are in school here for medical school and engineering school. And now we're working as doctors. We are living, breathing examples of Cuba's solidarity and action, because we're going to be able to go back to our homeland, Palestine, and help our people. And so part of it was like, you know, how can we, within our capacity as hood communists, as Africans within the US, elevate lines like that and elevate, you know, stories and narratives like that, and elevate really the truth within this battle of ideas. And so, and then on top of that, having the delegation within the delegation and meeting with Black Cuban organizers and activists and having really profound exchanges with them, who, you know, who are themselves some of the biggest supporters of the revolution, was very affirming, because they wanted to know, what were y'all talking about at the conference? You know, like, we're not media workers, but I think these ideas are interesting. And then we're sharing notes with them about what we're doing in our organizations here in the US, and they're telling us about what their projects and organizations are working on. So the trip was very affirming in that way too. You know, it was, I would say ideologically, I feel like developed, you know, having come, it was only 3 or 4 days, but it felt like a month in some ways. I'll put it like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that weird time, different time. I swear, time moves differently in free countries. I'm convinced that it does. Because it seemed like I was in Cuba for 3 weeks and I was only in Cuba for a week. And then it seemed like I was in Venezuela for a good 2 weeks and it was only a week. It was not enough, but you know. Yeah, so that is just wonderful. And one of the things I think that came out of this, which was published in Hood Communist, is called A Strategic Proposal to Battle Media Propaganda. Please explain this, because this is fabulous. This is we need a strategic approach to dealing with the incredible. I have never seen this amount of propaganda. Just it's horrible. I mean, and it's always bad. Propaganda is all everything you watch on television and in the movies. It's all propaganda. Mm-hmm. But since this genocide in Israel, against Palestine, these people are merciless. They are awful. How do people parse through these lies? They're slick. They spend a lot of money on the lies to make them look really good, but they're still lies. But how do we convince regular people that this stuff that these are all lies when it's presented so nicely and it's they can't. The New York Times would never lie.
Oh, yes, they would all the time. An article they wrote about Hamas allegedly carrying out mass rapes in occupied Palestine. It turns out like the writer was like a former IDF. Like it was just like made up whole cloth, and they just no consequences. In any case, so part of the problem with why imperialist propaganda is so effective is because like the ruling class in capitalist societies like invest a lot of time and resources into underdeveloping the political consciousness of their populations. Like when I live in Florida, and in Florida, they're banning like the study of African history, like using people's pronouns, like they're changing like the basic historical facts that students are taught. And the way that people talk about this is as if it's happening in isolation, and as if it's just like evil people doing evil things, but really it's part of a coordinated strategy of the ruling class to create a population that is extremely susceptible to their lies, that doesn't have the tools they need to think critically about what they're being told. That is why propaganda is so effective on a mass scale. And so when we think about how to combat propaganda, what's happening now for those of us in the movement is that we are in a constant state of reacting. Like they come out with like a hot new lie, like some other bald-faced claim, and we're just like, not true, like scrambling, reacting, frantically tweeting. Usually it happens in silos, meaning it might be like one organization or one movement trying to combat the lies, but it's not happening across organizations, across movements for the most part. It's also, like I said, in a constant state of reaction. And so what we were proposing in that speech, in those remarks, is that we need to have like a movement-wide, like across borders, across tendencies, across organizations, organized strategy to not just be constantly reacting, but to like tell like the truth of our narrative proactively, to talk about the work that we're doing, to talk about the world we want to build, to talk about what anti-imperialist nations have achieved, what revolutions have achieved, not just be constantly saying that's not true, but saying like, this is what needs to be. And again, it has to happen on a cross movement basis. And the example we gave in the speech was the example of when July 11th protests happened in Cuba in 2020, the major narrative within the US media was that it was Africans in Cuba rising up because the Cuban Revolution is racist, which is absurd. It's absurd. Like the Cuban Revolution, because of the leadership of African people within it, has drastically improved the conditions of Africans. I contend that the conditions of Africans in Cuba are better than the conditions of Africans here And yes, I will fight about
Far
it.
better. Far better.
It was just absurd. It was an absurd claim. But for a while, it like took hold because of like the petty bourgeois media class and academics who got their Afro-pessimism on, who began like spinning the narrative. Then Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, like the actual organization, put out this statement that said, if you care about Africans in Cuba and the blockade, drops mic. And the reason why they did that was because leaders within Black Lives Matter had traveled to Cuba with the Venceremos Brigade and with other delegations. And at the same time as Black Lives Matter put out that statement, Hood Communists put out Our Guide to the Blockade, the Black Alliance for Peace put out statements in support of Cuba, the APRP put out statements for support of Cuba. So across, it went from like liberal to revolutionary. All these African organizations who have been doing Cuba solidarity work for years were like, look, you're gonna stop this. And it like stopped in its tracks. And so that's the kind of coordination we need. If we're going to be reacting, it needs to be strategic. It needs to be organized. It needs to be across movements and tendencies. And we can't just be reacting. We have to be putting out proactively our narrative.
Right. Absolutely. And Ricky, I know you've got to go in a minute.
I do have to go. I do want to just jump in and say, Jackie, you may remember in that same instance, there was a Black Cuban woman, Casano, that was going viral for saying that, you know, Africans in the U.S. don't understand, they shouldn't be supporting Cuba, it's anti-Black, da-da-da-da. And what we were
was racist, man.
Right.
I've never wanted to punch somebody to a screen so bad.
and I actually met that person, so they are really that fanatic and do believe everything that they say. It's not like a thing. But what we were able to do as BAP was play that out strategically. We amassed every single thing that we've ever released, put together, any statement, any webinar, and then every time we've seen someone post her, we flooded it with all of our stuff. So to the point where she got drowned out. And that's strategy. That's what we mean by taking a strategic approach. You don't just attack these people individually as individuals.
Right.
You have to have to smash them, to drown them out, to shut them down. And you can only do that through strategic efforts. Like everybody has to be on one accord. It has to be unity across the board. It can't be about, you know, which organization are we going to prioritize to take the lead? I think those are the kind of nonsense conflicts that come up when we're talking about strategy. But I think the emphasis on what they were discussing when we were in Cuba was, fuck all that. We need unity. Like the bottom line is we need unity or we will lose.
Yeah. And I see in the chat, Salifou Mac from Burkina Faso, all the way in Burkina Faso. Love you, Salifou.
I do want to thank you. Yeah, I'm about to dip. I'll be speaking at a protest for International Working Women's Day. Don't forget that working part. Working Women's Day with in support of Palestine. So I'm on my way out. But I do want to thank you for allowing us this platform. I know Musa and Onya are gonna carry the rest perfectly, as they always do. So thank you so much, Jackie, and peace to the chat.
You bet.
Bye, y'all. Bye,
thank you. You be safe. So what's next for you all, for Hood Communist? I'm always amazed, because I usually sit down and I'm reading, you know, stuff from Bar and you guys, and I'm like, are they really just sitting there thinking of these very intense and complex things? Like where do you get your inspiration from to write? Does something have to happen and you're like, oh, that's a big, or is it something that you've always been thinking about, like, this is a problem and I don't think we talk about it enough, let's talk about it? Where does the inspiration come from?
Well, I can speak for myself, and I think Onye can probably relate. You know, part of it is just being an organizer. These conversations is just what comes up in the field when you're, you know, working with and organizing with and educating and building coalitions with the masses, when you're traveling and trying to do solidarity work. The work we create both emanates from that and is because of that. And I don't think we do Hood Communist just to be another voice. You know, there's a lot of places you can get African or quote unquote Black media. You know, there's also a lot of really great projects that are also independent like we are. But we're really trying to come at it as organizers and really have like a passion for what we're talking about. The question of what's next is a complex question but you know, we got exciting stuff in the works. I'm gonna let Onye maybe share a snippet of that. But I also know that what we do know about Cuba is so heavily and so deeply propagandized that the level of distortion is often misunderstood. And people gravitate to what's easiest to retweet, easiest to say, what sounds the best. So I've had conversations with Black people in the US who say, I went to Cuba on vacation and I didn't see any Black people driving cars. Cuba is anti-Black and things like that. And I try to understand that there are a lot of people who make entire political arguments just based on what they see with their eyes and experience, quote unquote. But if our people really knew the intricacies and the experiences of what life under the blockade is like, or for example, how in Havana, you know, those who have family who fled when the revolution took place, the landowners, the slumlords, the landlords, plantation factory owners, they send remittances and money back to their family, primarily in Havana, but other places as well. These remittances are huge and very important for Cuban people, for the government to an extent. But the people who left after the revolution were not primarily Black Cubans. They weren't Afro-Cubans by and large. And so those remittances, if the Cuban government were to try to redistribute Miami remittances, I think the US might invade, right? But you know, but so like my point is that if you see differences or you see certain experiences, there's material realities and conditions behind that. So if you travel to Cuba and you feel like, you know, and you're in a touristy area, especially, Cubans, the Cuban government, Black Cubans are very aware that tourism is an issue, right? That there are issues. They're not saying it's perfect, but I think that we as media workers and the kind of work that I'm hoping to produce in the future, like this documentary and working with Hood Communists, is things that provide people with an analysis of the truth, an analysis of the material conditions, an analysis of how the blockade and US imperialism is responsible for what we're seeing, and how the Cuban revolution has been one of the greatest blessings to African liberation in the last century, you know, and Cuba is a state sponsor of peace, but they're also a state sponsor of African liberation. And so however we can get that message across, however people can hear that and hold on to that, Cuba is a state sponsor of African liberation. That's where I'm looking at. That's where I'm headed. I don't know how Onye feels though.
No, I mean, I fully 100% agree. A sponsor of African liberation because of the revolutionary international solidarity that Cuba showed African national liberation struggles in Zimbabwe, in Algeria, in Guinea-Bissau, in Namibia, in Azania, in place after place after place. In the Congo, they tried, it didn't work out. But in place after place after place, when African revolutionary movements called, Cuba answered, sent doctors, sent troops, sent weapons, sent resources. But then also, it's really important to understand that the majority of Cuba's population is of African descent, that the liberation struggles of African people to slavery and colonization and indigenous people to colonization formed the foundation of what became the Cuban Revolution. There is no Cuban Revolution without the revolutionary militant struggle of African people on that land to liberate themselves. There were Africans on the front lines and in leadership positions all throughout the Cuban Revolution and the seeds of what became the Cuban Revolution. People always talk about Cuba like all Cubans look like Pitbull, like they're white. They're not. It's majority African. It's an African nation. It's an African revolution. Even Fidel Cabral said that Cuba was an African country. So like, man, like, God, because I was looking at the chat and some people are talking about Cuba being racist, and I'm just like, ooh, I didn't
see. See, I am not the only. Do you see, chat? You see, I'm not the only one that y'all do this to. I saw those comments and I was like, nope, no.
It's so hard not to argue. It's so hard.
I think also too, and I'm not even looking at the chat because like I know,
you know better.
I be involved in the foolishness, so I know what goes on in there, but you know, people often look at Cuba arming so many African liberation movements. Cuba also provides doctors around the world. They have thousands of doctors, educators, people who are experts on the public education system, because Cuba had pretty much the most successful literacy campaign in the world that was led by people, thousands of youth, majority were aged 12 to 20. I don't even think we can in the US comprehend what that would look like. They've exported their literacy, their literacy methods and their pedagogy, and they've actually established literacy campaigns in dozens of countries. And even within that, you talk to Afro-Cuban organizers and they always say, we had 400 plus years of colonization, chattel slavery, and only 55 years of revolution underneath the worst conditions possible with the biggest empire in history right next door to you, right? And so they have so much understanding and self-awareness of their situation and of our situation a lot of the time too, to be honest. And I think there's something that happens where Western chauvinism enters into the chat. People go to Cuba demanding to hear about different things from their interests. Whereas when you talk to the Cuban organizers, they're like, we can deal with racism and these things on our own. We want to tell you about the blockade because your state is the one implementing it. And it is hurting our ability to organize for ourselves because all of the resources and attention and everything necessarily is at this big blockade that's a boot on our neck. And so, yeah, every time I go, that reality is just like more and more apparent because we're kind of in a mask-off situation, not just with Palestine and all kinds of things, but with Cuba. For the first time ever, they're asking the UN to step in and help them because they're having food shortages. It is 100% directly because of the blockade. And so the situation is so dire that like I really don't think people having these lofty proto-academic conversations about very big words that's half the time I don't even know if they know what they mean, if they're really aware and have come face to face with the reality of what the situation is like.
Yeah, and it's really interesting talking about anything that Black organizers are doing. You are confronted with this anti-blackness thing all the time now, and I try not to be frustrated with it because I understand. Stop grinning at me like that on your head. I try not to be frustrated with it because again, I have to always remember that everybody doesn't know what I know now, and I didn't even know. I didn't always know what I know. So I try to be patient with people who are like, everyone around the world hates Black people. It's like, okay, you have to take into account hundreds of years of colonialism, hundreds of years of settler colonialism in particular, hundreds of years of apartheid and massacres and all of this. And when you really look at the history, yes, racism was a part of all of this, but it was done because of capitalism. It was done because of capitalism and imperialism. So the massacres and the mistreatment of Black people didn't just happen to Black people, right? The English colonized the fuck out of India. I mean, do you know what those people did to Indian? Oh my God. I mean, there is not, I don't think there is a non-European country that has been colonized by the English that's not just in Africa, that did not suffer tremendously under. So this is why people in the world still think little of East Asians, of Pakistanis, of Vietnamese, of Taiwanese, unless of course the Taiwanese want to break away from China, and then they'll take U.S. weapons. But until then, they're like, no, they're the enemy too. Those little yellow people, because that's how these people think. This is not Black people. I do not think, I believe that Black people are uniquely, or only, not singularly is what I'm looking for. Black people are not singularly hated around the world. And we think that other oppressed people hate us. That's the problem I have with the anti-Blackness argument. Because, okay, fine, the ruling class all over the world, fine, they hate us. They hate everybody. But the working class and the poor, the oppressed classes, do we really believe that those people who are being crushed by capitalism and imperialism, the same way we have been, do we really believe those people, look up and see a Black person who wants to be in solidarity with them and work with them and struggle along with them? Do we really think the people look up at Black people reaching out with solidarity? They just automatically look at us and like, nah, fuck you niggas. We don't want your help. That is not how it is at all. The antagonism toward non-European people, but particularly Black people, is something that is perpetrated by the State Department and the colonizers all over the world. That's not just like some natural indigenous kind of thought that, oppressed people in Kazakhstan are like, we have it bad, but you know what? As long as those niggas don't come over here, we'll be fine. Come on, y'all. It's not, anti-Blackness is not the problem with the world. Capitalism and imperialism are the primary contradictions. Every other kind of oppression comes out of that. And the people who uphold the capitalist and imperialist systems in the US and around the world, of course, they're going to perpetuate narratives about the people they oppress and make money off of, so that everybody else cannot give a damn about what the system does to those people. That I have a really hard time believing that people actually believe that just around the world, whenever people think about Black people, they just hate Black people. That's the thing people think of around the world when they think of Black people. We just hate you. And I'm sorry, nothing is ever that simple or that childish. That's kind of childish, I think. I don't know, but I try not to look at people who have those opinions that way, because I realize, okay, you don't understand the whole picture. You're not seeing the whole picture. But people buy into that anti-Blackness stuff and make it the reason for, number one, why we shouldn't have solidarity with certain countries, because, they have racism in their countries. Well, if they had colonization, it's colonization. That's the problem. It's not Cubans hating Black people. It was the Spanish. I mean, good grief. So it keeps people, this idea that everybody around the world hates Black people, feeds into this idea among Black people here that we shouldn't be in solidarity with other people around the world and their struggles for freedom because they hate Black people, which is, what people say about Palestine. Palestinians hate Black people. Yeah. Ask some of those Black Palestinians about how they're asked. Just ask. But then I think it also keeps people from really studying, really learning, really understanding the foundation of all of this, the real primary contradictions, and it keeps people from indicting capitalism and imperialism and settler colonialism. Those are the problems. It's not, people just generally hate Black people around the world. It's not that simple.
Well, I would say I'm a materialist, and I know that materially, demonstrably, through evidence, hard facts, imperialism, colonialism, and capitalism have been the driving forces of development for at least the last 200 years, maybe the last 4, depending on who you ask. And Walter Rodney says that what is unique is the advent of chattel slavery specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a unique event in history, the African Ma'afa, as I like to call it. But that does not mean we're the only ones that have unique events in our history. I recently in November, I traveled to the DPRK University, Salifu. I traveled to the DPRK University in Japan, where Korean residents have formed a network of Korean schools all the way from K through 12 to university. And to hear about the struggles of these Koreans who, after the US decimated 80% of standing structures across the Korean peninsula, 80% of all standing structures. So that's everything from a home to an office building to a church, the shed in your backyard. 80% of all standing structures. They dropped more tons of napalm and explosives than ever before in history. In fact, the first time that these numbers are being rivaled is right now in Gaza, just for perspective. Then at the same time, Imperial Japan took over 80,000 Korean women as sex slaves, forced sex slaves for the Imperial Army. You had over 800,000 Koreans who were forced laborers. They don't call it slavery, but when I was there and hearing from survivors and walking through the quarters where they lived, it is literally slavery. It might not have been chattel slavery, but it was a form of, so like the point I'm getting at is that when you learn about the genuine struggles and history of the rest of the world, they also have unique claims to suffering and oppression via imperialism. And the same way that they may have backwards ideas about Africans because of imperialism. Walter Rodney said that mental underdevelopment is a core facet of underdevelopment and of imperialism. I could also walk to my neighbors I'm in a majority African neighborhood, and if I asked them, they probably would tell me a whole bunch of stereotypes they hold about Koreans, right? And so to me, the primary objective remains imperialism, because that is where we get these socially backward ideas that emanate from. And if we use that as a basis of unity, instead of trying to parse through this elusive anti-blackness term, then we all have a common enemy and a common objective. And the last thing I'll say is I think we need to be careful, because there are very academic thoughts and terms that are debated and are not taken as at face value as fact inside of academia where they emanate from. You can have arguments about ontology inside of academia, but because of social media and how quickly information travels, certain concepts become commonplace and certain phrasings suddenly get accepted at face value and recycled without people actually understanding the implications of what this means in a time where solidarity with the third world and global south is quite literally the only way we're going to survive a burning earth. And so I'm going to yield there, because this is something me and Erica were literally just talking about, and I wish she was here, but I'm a yield there.
Okay, all right. We may come back to it, but I'm so glad we were able to get Salifu. Hey, Salifu Mac, everybody, all the way from Guinea-Bissau.
Burkina.
I'm sorry. I don't know why. I always confuse those two countries. My mind thinks one thing and my mouth is just like, nah, it's that other place. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Oh, no. Uh-oh. What happened? Okay. We'll wait. We'll wait.
I want to know what Salif has to say. Salif, who dragged
Yeah. Yeah, because that so someone, so in the meantime, so someone, the person who was asking the question in the chat, let me go. He said he asked a question about why prisons exist in Cuba first. And then so Jay said the left at the imperialist core are willing to disavow the plain fact of why prisons exist on the planet to underpin the world. I don't recall any of you saying that.
I think the question of prisons in Cuba, like this is kind of an example of what Musa was talking about how analysis is very specific to the context of the United States, is like universalized. People assume because they understand the construction of race in the US that they understand it universally. It's not true. One thing about why prisons would exist in Cuba, we talked briefly about the July 11th protests that happened in summer of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why those protests happened is because of the maximum pressure campaign that the Trump administration applied on Cuba. Over 200 additional sanctions meant to starve and strangle the Cuban people. One of the consequences of those sanctions and also the COVID-19 pandemic was that Cuba had to shut down its tourism industry. It had no income coming in. It led to drastic shortages and suffering on the island. And at the same time, they were trying to carry out like a statewide COVID response, but they were not able to get basic supplies they needed, like syringes to distribute vaccines. And so and they were also experiencing like rolling blackouts and all kinds of like wild stuff because of the action of the US. So the mass of the people in Cuba absolutely were dissatisfied. And like a lot of the people in those protests took to the streets because they were like, where's the vaccine? Why aren't the lights on? This is terrible. We're suffering. And that was the intent of the US policy. But also among those mass mobilizations, and if you talk to Cubans in Cuba who saw it happen, like they talk about this too. Like people were like attempting to like sabotage water supplies, setting cop cars on fire, like attacking hospitals, like people who were not aligned with the masses of folks who had like legitimate grievances, but who were trying to use the opportunity to attack the Cuban state and to attack the basic infrastructure that Cuban people needed to live. And this tactic, these people were like funded by USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, organs of the United States whose explicit intent is to destabilize countries resisting imperialism. So this history, this what happened in July 11th, where people took advantage of like dissatisfaction to wreak havoc, that happens over and over and over again in Cuba. The US has an explicit policy to attempt to destabilize and undermine the Cuban state, to overthrow the Cuban Revolution. And they do this by trying to sow discord inside, by paying people, by organizing people to attack civilians and civilian infrastructure. So in a context like that, what is Cuba supposed to do? People go and try to poison the water supply. They try to attack a hospital. What happens to those people? That is who got arrested at the July 11th protest. And where like prisons are what? What are they supposed to do? Tell the US to stop attacking Cuba. Tell the US to stop giving millions of dollars to Ned to like give to saboteurs inside of Cuba. If you want Africans in Cuba not to end the blockade, why are you talking about the prisons? Stop, they have people attempting to destabilize their government. What are they supposed to do? Excuse me, I'm so sorry.
No, don't be sorry, because I think this question about prisons anywhere in the world, but especially in a revolutionary country, is very weird. It's very weird because do you know who was the leader of Cuba before the revolution? That is the person who built the damn prisons. All the prisons, because of all the people that Fulgencio Bautista, I think I pronounced his name right that time, arrested for opposing his government. And that's aside from all the people that he had killed. So that's, and then the Spanish colonized Cuba for centuries. They built the prisons. So then Cuba becomes free. They free themselves from US imperialism through armed struggle. And they get rid of Bautista. And they get rid of the rest of the Bautista cohort. And some of those people had to be imprisoned. And some of those people, well, I guess they're finding out what's really in the ancestral realm right now. I mean, because I don't understand. Like, once you win a revolution against a brutal capitalist imperialist juggernaut that has backed an absolute dictator in your country, who is stealing the country's money, killing people, and imprisoning folks for protesting him, and the US is completely happy about that. Like, once you win against these people, so what are you supposed to do with these people then? And this was the problem I had with South Africa. I'll tell you right now. What, you gonna have a truth and reconciliation commission thing, and y'all gonna sit down and hatch it out and hug and do something, and then I'm gonna send you on your way? To hell if I am. No,
I
I'm
would
not.
also, I also think, if you are thinking materially and dialectically, then you know that you cannot make a one-to-one comparison without understanding the context. So if police and prisons are arms of the state, then if that state is a people state, then who do these institutions serve? This is why when we talk about community control of the police, for example, we're talking about these institutions needing to serve the masses and the people. And in Cuba, they have that. We don't. But I think Salifu is back. Salifu, is your mic working now?
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Exactly. Okay.
Hey,
Oh, let me express
hey,
initially
hey.
how happy I am to be here, Jackie, and give some appreciation for your consistency in bringing this kind of information to our people on a consistent basis in ways that are like accessible. I will always cling to the memories of sitting at home with my mom and my mom hearing your voice down the hall in my room and coming to my room and being like, "That's my girl," and coming and sitting beside me to listen to you speak about things that me and her just argued about an hour before. Somehow you have the ability to connect with people in ways that other people don't, and I really am just always so honored to hear you speak and be able to appear on your platform. So thank you for everything that you do. And then I
Oh,
want
don't
to
you
give
make
some
me cry on
appreciation
this
to.
show. Don't you make me
No,
cry.
we're not gonna cry. We're not gonna cry. And I want to give some appreciation to my comrades over here. I don't know, the mirror thing is throwing me off. Who have been consistently holding this line on Cuba for so long and facilitating opportunities for people to go and visit and see for themselves. For writing, broadcasting, everything that we can do to bring truth to our people. You guys have said everything so perfectly so far about the impacts of the blockade and how people have tried to bastardize the concepts of racism and all these things. I just want to sprinkle a little something in here real quick. I think that a lot of people who jumped on the abolition
Here's my
and
bowl. Put it in my bowl.
the Afro-pessimist wave and all these kinds of things were well intentioned, maybe at the time that it started. But I find that those of us who tend to dabble in internationalism don't understand the responsibility that we have to be serious about the things that we're talking about. So right now, the wave I feel for a lot of people in the global north is to be like, oh, I support this, I support that. Here's the flag in my bio. Here's the flag in my display name. I care about Palestine. I care, and then they go, but everybody's talking about Palestine. Nobody's talking about Congo.
Congo.
Nobody's talking about Haiti. Nobody's talking about Sudan because you know what? Anti-blackness. And that's their mic drop, slam the big joker down on the table. But the issue with these things and what really, Jackie, what really grinds my gears here is that the people who were really primed to talk about abolition and police brutality and all these kinds of things, they actually left that wave and abandoned it in the US context to go bastardize other people's struggles without realizing that the struggles that they so badly want to gotcha Palestine with have a direct correlation, right, to this concept of police brutality and
Mm.
in the US. So when you talk about a country like Haiti, when you talk about a country like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and I'm here in Burkina Faso right now. When you talk about countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, what you're talking about is countries who the international community have deemed ungovernable, right? They're saying that these people are out of control, and because of Western-backed forces, terrorists. Okay, let's talk about terrorists and gangs because there's a direct correlation here with this thing,
Come
right?
on.
So the terrorist problem is so bad, the gang problem is so bad, as they're saying in Haiti. Where have we heard words like this before? Where have we heard concepts like this before? In the African community in the US, they say our gang problems are so out of control, our problems with violence are so out of control that we must intervene. And their intervention always brings a wave of problems that did not exist before they got there. This is the connection that I wish so many of these people would desperately make when they're saying nobody talks about Congo, nobody talks about Haiti. I'm like, yes. And since you are the person that wants to talk about it, I want you to say this thing. I want you to say it right now. I want you to stop perpetuating these lies about Haiti, right? Like, I want you to stop talking about our people in ways that make it seem like we are exceptionally violent. We're like exceptionally ungovernable. We're exceptionally just directionless and like, all these kinds of things. These are all a part of like a white supremacist narrative, right? And so when we do that, it lets us know we have space to talk about Palestine. We have space to talk about Cuba. We have space to talk about Haiti. We have space to talk about Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso. We have as much space as we want as people representing an imperialist country, unlike any imperialist country before, because we understand the nuances of imperialism. We understand how it shows up in these different countries, and we're not like in a race to the bottom to pretend that like we're like in some kind of, I don't know, competition for who can get the most attention. Musa, Onye, Erica has been so consistent about Cuba, and then Erica turns around and spends another 24 hours working on Haiti, and then Musa turns around and spends another 48 hours working on Palestine, and then Onye spends another 24 hours trying to highlight things that are happening in Honduras. Like, it's possible. We can do all of these things when we understand the nuances of the places that we're talking about. We have to take the time though to understand what's happening and not use these vague concepts like anti-blackness to just be like, well, I only want to talk about this one thing today, and the reason why is because anti-blackness. That is so. Can I curse on here, Jackie?
Absolutely.
That is
Yes.
so fucking crazy, and it's so selfish. Why are you centering yourself in other people's struggles? That's insane. It's insane to me, right? That's it. That's all I wanted to say.
I mean, I don't know. So it strikes me that people maybe just kind of don't understand more than I think they don't. Because it strikes me that people don't understand that when we are talking about a lot of these places, well, where is there in the world that the British and the US and where didn't they colonize? Like, so I don't think I understand how we understand. I thought we understood that that colonization is was almost the delivery of these ideas, these very capitalist, white supremacist, imperialist ideas. It is through colonialism where people, the indigenous people in these colonized countries, are not only told that they are lesser people than the colonizers, which is why they're being colonized, because if you were as great as we were, we wouldn't have been able to colonize you, right? That's what they say, to convince the oppressed people that this is just your lot in life. So just we'll take care of you. And they're not only telling the indigenous people that they are colonizing, that they should think of themselves as less than the colonizers, as their subjects, right? But then they all also tell colonized people to stay away from other colonized people, not because of any hatred of those, because I don't know what's in the mind of these colonizers, right? I can't read their minds, but I know that keeping those oppressed people isolated from other oppressed people is of material interest to them, because as long as you think that you are being oppressed all by yourself, you're not going to fight a whole lot. There might be a few of you who are like, fuck this, I am not taking this shit. But most folks, most colonized folks, when they think they are alone and they're the only ones, and there's this big huge, they're not going to fight. They're not going to fight a lot, because when you isolate people from other people who are going through the same thing you're going through, you never find that out. You never know that you are in the same situation as another group of people. And then once you get together like that, then you're like, well, wait, if all of us are dealing with the same problem, why don't we fight them together? See, that's why colonists told the people they were colonizing that you're subhuman, not because they hated them because they were brown or yellow, or I'm sure some of the individual people did, but for the sake of the success of the project of colonialism, the people needed to be isolated, subjugated, and indoctrinated to believe that they did not deserve freedom, and to believe that they needed to stay away from those wretched people over there, because as bad as you all are, oh, those people are worse. They're just worse. So, I mean, if we understand that about how colonialism works, and while I understand that there is absolutely a systemic hatred, particularly in this country, of Black people, I just don't see where that is universal. It's like wherever we go, we're always gonna, no matter where we go, people are gonna hate us. And I just haven't had that experience. That's, as I don't put a lot of stock in lived experience, but I think it matters that all of these 4, 5, however many Negroes that we have been on these brigades with. So what's that, like a couple hundred over the past few years? I can't say that anti-blackness is everywhere when we've gone to Cuba and we didn't get treated badly because we're Black. That wasn't. Now, I have had some interesting experiences, yes, but institutionally, we don't go to Cuba and see Blacks only, whites only, this is your place. So I understand that there is a sentiment of negativity toward Black people that is more intense in the imperial core than I think it is anywhere else in the world, probably. But I don't think that it's this thing that's like universal anti-Blackness, that everybody in the world hates Black people. I just don't see that. I don't know.
Well, Jackie, it depends. It depends on what our intentions are, right? So I can say that from the Pan-Africanist perspective, right? We start at the baseline that we understand no African anywhere in the world will ever be free unless Africa is free. So it's not that we deny that African people, wherever we are, struggle, but it's about what is the final conclusion of that analysis, right? I personally, I go hard at the Afro-pessimist because I'm hoping to grab somebody who is kind of like me, because I was on that track before Erica snatched me up and was like, no, you're not gonna do this, right? Because we're saying similar things using some very oddly different language, right? But what is the natural conclusion? Sometimes when you hear these people speak, what you hear is things are just predestined to be this way. So there's no purpose in struggling. There's no
Exactly.
purpose in fighting. But
Mm-hmm.
that is not based on a materialist analysis. That's what you get when you start from like a metaphysical, psychedelic. I just did 10 shrooms and ate a brownie in my grandma's garage today, and this is how I think about myself. But then when you move to the side of materialism and you understand Africa is a land, it's a land base, it's a continent. The people who descend from that land base are real people who exist in the material world. We have two choices. We can lay down and accept the way that history has gone for us to this point, or we can fight to do something and build a new world completely different with our bare hands today, right? Those are two different conclusions. And so when you hear Pan-Africanists like myself or Onyesanwu or Musa or Erica or you speak about this thing, we're not talking about this like some why did you making us sound like lepers? I don't like that. Like, stop talking about me like that. Like, that's why why are you making it seem like I have a disease like that can't be cured? Like, I'm a human being. I'm a powerful human being that's going to do everything that I can to change my circumstances and my situation. And that is the bottom line. That is the difference between materialism and like whatever this idealistic thing is that people are doing. And I'll say that one of the biggest downfalls that happened in 2020, when we were being like appropriated and commandeered by the states and by the state, and people were coming into our organizations and imploding them and blowing them up, and everybody was issuing their open letters about, I don't like this person and this person is that and all these kinds of things. What happened was people were missing out on fundamental political education. A lot of this shit could be cleared up if people were actually engaged in real serious study with other people about history. A lot of this stuff is really being perpetuated on the basis of bad history. So what we need to really get back to, and something that Hood Communists is really pushing all the time consistently, is let's get back to the basics, guys. Because y'all are running around saying you understand imperialism. You don't. Y'all are running around saying you understand colonialism. You don't. You know what I'm saying? So come, I'm not even trying to shame you. Just come walk backwards with me. Come backwards with me, and we do this thing together and see if you come to a different conclusion.
I'm saying, see this. Do you see why? Do you see why I am proud of these people as if they were my own family? Because the folks in my family, I love them, but they ain't this sharp. They just are not. So Musa, I think you were on stack.
Yeah, I just, briefly, because I wasn't planning on talking about this, but it's the tea is oolong, and that's my favorite. And I think a few things. One, as Salifu alluded to, this knee-jerk reaction to say you're talking about Palestine, but what about these people? Or you're talking about this, but what about these people? And label certain things anti-blackness. We have established organizations, Friends of the Congo, for example. Friends of the Congo is a solidarity organization that has been doing work to try to get people to talk about the Congo for literally decades, right? There's in October every year, there's a Congo week for this issue. And so what we're hearing about the Congo is the result, it's the accumulation of decades of people trying to get people to pay attention. And so if there is like a knee-jerk reaction to drag attention over there without any kind of, like Salifu said, proper political education and study, then all you're doing is rerouting attention and adding discourse for the sake of discourse, but you have not geared people towards actual organizations doing that work, nor involved yourself in those organizations doing that work. AAPRP is in the room with us right now. They've been doing work, for example, around the Sahel and what we're seeing in the Sahel in terms of them telling France to get the fuck out, basically. And they have been doing work in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, in Mali for decades. So just because you hear about in a situation because it's an acute situation at the time, same thing with Sudan. Right? 1 to 2 years ago, the Black Alliance for Peace was putting out statements about Sudan. The very first article that I ever wrote was in 2015, or for a public place, was like 2015, 2016, and I'm talking about South Sudan. Mm-hmm. Right? And so the point is not to say, why is nobody talking about this? The point is for people to act about certain things, not just to talk about. So like with Black Alliance for Peace, we're saying Haiti has an impending invasion coming, right? Like, I'm sure there's like a landowning class of like white Europeans in Haiti, right? That should be what you're talking about. You should be talking about the core group. You should be talking about the United Nations. Like, where we put our attention is extremely political and is extremely itself an intentional act. And so like, Salifu was saying, we do not have a robust media literacy operation in the US. We do not have robust political education, let alone regular education. Data shows that majority of adults in the US have a 6th grade reading level.
Mm-hmm.
So why are we spending so much time discussing academic, theories and very hyper extracted theories that are not censoring the primary contradictions that people need to know about? And this is why I feel like at Hood Communists, like Slifu said, we're trying to get people. I like how he said it the best, actually. Take a few steps backwards with me. That was what a loving and caring way to say that. You didn't have to say it like that either. And I also just want to quickly, because we talked about abolition, I used to call myself an abolition very publicly and proudly. And around the same time as my sister Erica Keynes, I feel like she's missing a good. This is like her bag. What we're talking about right now.
I know she's in the chat, upset that she can't be on the screen.
I keep telling y'all, don't look at this chat. But me and Erica Keynes around the same time, we realized and we saw the way that U.S. centric abolition was being used as a tool of imperialism, and how it was being used as a tool of propaganda. And we reassessed and looked at it from its material basis. And the only way to get abolition is communism and socialism. So why are we spending so much time attempting to parse through the realities and the so-called discrimination and social views and all these things of the few liberated zones that we have? If you know about the concept of liberated zones, we have so few. We got Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, the DPRK, China to an extent. You know what I mean? But like we can count them on our hands damn near. And this is where you're spending your time. It's just very unserious. I'll put it like that, actually. It's very unserious. And I'm trying to not waste my time on things that are not serious. And this isn't just like about feelings and emotions. This is an ideological battle of ideas that we're talking about. We're talking about holding ideological and theoretical lines down for years, even when it's unpopular. And, let me yield there, because I know that these YouTube streets, you say you get to talking a little too much, and then suddenly, but I'm going to yield there. But Brother Salifu, thank you for bringing the word. And as always,
Yeah, definitely appreciate it. And, I just always want to know, so what do we do with that? Right? That's the question. Even if I don't entirely understand something, the first question I'm going to ask is, okay, that's an interesting concept, but we're trying to organize for liberation. So what do we do with that? So what do I do with the fact that some people believe that anti-blackness is all over the world, and everybody around the world hates Black people, and okay, all right. So what do we do with that? What does that do to influence how we organize, who we organize with, or whether we organize at all? And for me, it doesn't have an impact on that. And I feel like if people believe it should have an impact, then I feel like then I get to your conclusion, Musa. Like, why are we wasting our time on this? Why? Because remember, now we just went through the big old fight last year over this Rage Against the War Machine rally, right? And we're talking about everybody hates Black people, right? Everybody in the world hates Black people. So when Black people said, I don't think it's a good idea for Black people to be involved in this event with a bunch of bigots. That's a bad idea. Like, it's not like I have a hard time seeing who hates me, right? We don't have a hard time knowing the people who are around us who hate us. So we're organizing against war. This group comes along. They really are a bunch of bigots and homophobes. And the Black folks are like, nope, we're not fucking with them. And we get all of this backlash from all of these people who are like, how could you not want to organize with people who want to end nuclear war? Oh, I don't know, because on every other day they want to kill us. So I'm not going to organize with them because they hate Black people and they hate queer people. It's that simple. And then you move on and you go organize with the people. So knowing that Afro-pessimism is a thing, what that do? What if I'm already very well aware of who I should and should not be organizing with? What does Afro-pessimism do in for me in my organizing? Am I missing something, y'all?
What you're missing is that there is no organizing.
I'm sorry. I mean, word. Yep. Yes. Correct. I also think that the struggle I have with anti-blackness discourse and like Afro-pessimism more broadly is that it takes the colonization of African people out of the context of global imperialism. Like, you could only say, why you talk about Palestine? How come you're not talking about the Congo? How come you're not talking about Haiti? If you don't understand that Zionism is like a global force of reaction, that Zionists are intricately involved in the exploitation of Africa, in what's going on in the Congo, in what's happening in Haiti, that they train police forces that brutally repress African people all over the planet, that they fund their genocide of Palestinian resources stolen from Africa, that they aligned with reactionary settler colonial governments all across Africa, like Rhodesia, like the apartheid South African government. Like, you can't actually separate the issue of a free Palestine and a free Congo or a free Haiti. But people don't, they understand the condition of African people as separate from this global system, precisely because, as Salifo explained, they don't understand imperialism. They think they do. They think they have the gist, but they really don't get it. It's completely interconnected. And it always has been. That's the nature of the system. Colonization is a tactic of imperialism. Racism and white supremacy are tactics of colonization. People don't hate African people because we're cursed. People hate African people because the entire global economic system of capitalism and imperialism depends on resources and land and labor stolen from Africa. They need Africa divided, unstable, so they can keep looting it. That's why Congo hasn't had a functioning government in generations, because Congo is rich in resources. Like, you can't understand the condition of African people without understanding global imperialism. And additionally, they take it out of context by not engaging with the revolutionary national liberation struggles carried out by Africans in places like Cuba, in places like Grenada, in places like Zimbabwe, in places like Algeria, and all over the African continent, all over the African world, even the Haitian Revolution. You see us being placed by colonization into a condition of complete dehumanization, and you see us organizing and overturning that condition. It's not, anti-blackness is treated as like this fixed, permanent thing. Like, African people have not proven that we can transform that condition. So really, we have to change. We have to address like the material conditions, this global system of imperialism, and it will transform how we think about ourselves and how the world thinks about us. But people don't engage with the actual history, and that's what makes it so frustrating. It is a very localized, very specific analysis that people attempt to make universal, and they attempt to make it universal by ignoring all context that shows how flawed it is. It's so actually so arrogant. I feel like it only could have came from like a Western nation or like a Western settler colony.
Yeah, but I am apparently cursed. I'm malicious and I'm evil and I'm an angry Black woman and I'm all that shit. But you're still wrong. So I'll be all that shit and more. I don't like to argue with people. It's just I just don't. This is clear. This is simple. This is easy. Why are we wasting our time arguing over something that, like I said, what difference does it make? What does it change the direction of the organizing? Does it change our strategies? Does it change our tactics? Anyway. Yeah, I think we got hijacked by that conversation. And I know you have to leave, Musa. So yeah, what is coming for Hood Communists? What's coming up for Hood Communists?
The YouTube channel. Okay. We are launching a YouTube channel and we need to get to 100 likes because we want to have a report back of our Cuba trip on Sunday, March 17th at, I believe, 10 a.m. Eastern. Oh my God. Yep, no, 9 a.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Eastern. But we can't stream it to the YouTube channel until we get 100 likes. So why don't you go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel
Would
so
you
you can get
please fix that, y'all? Fix that.
Yes, I just dropped the link in the chat. Subscribe, please subscribe, and that way we can stream live. But we want to do like we do our Hood Communist Radio very sporadically. We just had the last one in a year last week, but we want to start doing like video programs like this. We're inspired by you, Jackie. We're inspired by our ancestors' voices, and we want to get the Hood Communist voice out there, get our faces out there because we're so cute and charismatic. So subscribe to the channel. Into our report back 9 a.m. Eastern time next on Sunday the 17th. And what else is happening?
What else? What are you doing in Burkina Faso? Salifu moved away from us, went all the way. I mean, went back to the motherland. Dang.
Yes, yes. And struggle is struggle everywhere you go. You will never escape it, is what I'm learning.
Mm.
Right now, in Burkina Faso, and I'm sure the people that are tuning into this really understand the context of where we are right now with the AES. And so right now in Burkina Faso, we are a country which is in practice breaking away from the West, breaking away from France, right? And we're doing so under the context of a military government, and this has been highly, highly, highly debatable within many, 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 many circles, Pan-Africanist circles, anti-imperialist circles, liberal circles. But at the end of the day, what we are kind of fortunate in terms of dealing with right now is that we are in a context where organizing everything is possible, right? Like we are working in the context of a government which is anti-imperialist. We are working in the context of a government which is anti-West. And so what our circle of the APRP, Burkina Books, the Thomas Sankara Center for African Liberation and Unity, what we're really focused on right now is really trying to use this opportunity to organize as many people as we can under the correct ideology, which is the idea of unifying Africa under one united socialist government, right? The AES, this thing that we talk about, that we dream about, these United States, these three United States in Africa, it is by far the the goal for us. It is just a stepping stone. It's just a platform to use that we're hoping we can use to demonstrate to other African people that like unity is possible. And so like let's all link up as much as we can, as many of us as we can, as possible. And so what the Thomas Sankara Center is engaged in right now is a social cartography project where we are really trying to demonstrate to the masses of Africans here in Africa and around the world that Africans actually do want unity. That this is not something that's being imposed on us from the top down. This is not like a dream of Traore. This is a dream
Mm.
that existed way before him and any other leader
Wow.
in Mali or in Niger. This is something that Africans have wanted since we understood what colonialism was. We've always understood that our strength was in numbers and not apart from each other. And I would just say personally, for me as an African coming out of the diaspora, coming out of the context of the US, where sometimes this idea of Pan-African unity is treated like a pipe dream, like, oh, that's not really realistic, like y'all not serious. It's so refreshing to me being here to just go across the street and talk to my neighbors and say, then they'll ask me like, why would you come here? Like, why would you come here from the United States? Like, why are you in Burkina Faso? First of all, they don't even understand. Like, a lot of people here don't even, the same way we're disconnected from colonialism, a lot of people here are disconnected from the transatlantic slave trade. So when I try to explain to people that, like, I literally was born in the U.S., my parents were born in the U.S., my grandparents were born in the U.S., they be like, yeah, but certainly you know where your grandparents were born or where they're from. And I'm like, no, I don't. And, oh, you're playing a joke, like you're trying to be funny. No, I actually don't. Slavery, it happened. And we have these like aha moments, but it's really refreshing to go and they say, well, why are you here? Why would you come? And then I say, well, I came because I believe in Pan-Africanism and I believe that this is a place that's really serious about that. And it's just like a 60-year-old Black woman that's like, yeah, Africa must unite. Like, yes, Madam Bernadette, we must unite. I love you. Thank you for saying that. I love it. So yeah, that's what we're involved in here, and really just trying to like reinvigorate a lot of the ideals that existed during the Sankara effort. Another one being with today being International Working Women's Day, really trying to hammer home for people. You can't just like look at the aesthetic of Sankara and be like, oh, I love that revolutionary thing. You have to really read him and really
Oh,
feel and believe the things that he said, particularly around this idea of the emancipation of women. This is another thing that's getting particularly like convoluted, I would say, in like Western circles. People are like pretending patriarchy doesn't exist. People don't want to deal with misogyny, all these kinds of things. These things are very real, have very real material impacts on African women, no matter where they are, and they have real material impacts on African men. And so we look at what Sankara and Nkrumah and Cabral and the women of Udamu and the women of the struggle in Mozambique, like all these, what they were trying to teach us. We have so much stuff to just pick up on and just like ride off into the sunset with. And so that's what we're trying to do here. It's the same thing that all AAPRP circles are trying to do everywhere they are, is adapt to the context and the conditions where they are and keep things moving forward.
and see, like I always say, we have a very Western indoctrinated view of our own history. I always tell people that all of the anti-colonial struggles that were won on the continent are very, very important to how we should organize. We don't really have to fight pretending like we know that we're going to win. We've won before. That's what our history shows us. We have defeated the colonialists before. They just kept coming. We were not as organized as we needed to be to develop the systems that we needed. Partially, that was part of the problem. But the other part of the problem is the colonialists are the imperialists, and they were not going to give up their colonies and their former subjects and their exploitable labor that easily. So they, put on a facade, tried to be friends, and said, "Oh, we're coming to you with a deal." No, 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 we're not going to colonize. No, 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 we're not going to colonize. We're going to give you a deal. Let's talk about mining rights. And then they propped up leaders of these African nations. They had to assassinate and get rid of the revolutionary leaders who beat them, just because out of GP, because they weren't going to let them live because they beat them. So then they had to replace those leaders that the people got behind with their imperialist, colonialist puppets. And that's how they keep Africa underdeveloped. But as we see in Burkina Faso, as we see in Niger, we see in Mali, and other places around the continent, the people are not unaware that they have to continue this liberation struggle. They are not unaware of who and what they're fighting against. So I saw a comment earlier. A lot of times we have no idea what's going on the continent. We think, the Malians kicked the French out, but they didn't kick the U.S. out. Malians are protesting, holding up signs saying, "U.S. get the fuck out." I've seen the pictures myself. So I mean, we have a limited view of the rest of the world, but that's by design. I hope you understand that. It is by design that we are dissuaded from traveling, from seeing the rest of the world. Hell, we won't even go to another state in this country to talk to other people, other people like us in this country. And of course, there's the cost issue, right? So traveling to meet other people who are not in this imperial core, of course, that's more difficult for the most exploited people in the country, because keeping us apart from other working class and oppressed people around the world, that's the design. That is the plan. But those of us who do this work, who do travel, who are engaged in solidarity work, we know different. And we're trying very hard to do what Kwame Ture told us to do. We have to provide the people constant political education constantly. It's not a one-off. It's not a, I'm going to have a teach-in, next week on Palestine and the history and we're going to grow from that. No, we're going to have a teach-in next week and the week after that and the week after that. And in between, we're going to have to go to some demonstrations. And in between, we're going to have to do some internal study, right? So we can get our stuff straight. And we're going to have to do that regularly a lot. We're going to have our meetings so we can get our administration straight so none of the tasks fall through the cracks. We have to find somebody to print all our stuff that's not going to cost an arm and a leg because we broke. You understand? We're doing all of this. Oh, and we're individuals who have lives and families and responsibilities outside of this work. And we're juggling all that. And then some of us are just foolish enough to believe that we can get on YouTube and try to give people some information without folks losing their mind. That does not happen all the time. It's just a part of the gig. I don't accept it, but it just is. So, because I would love, okay, I would tell you, really, I would love for people to just be appreciative, right? I would love for people to just say, man, I didn't know all of that. I'm not sure if I understand all of that. Let me get some links or whatever to research. But man, thanks for talking to us. But instead, you're always going to get folks who either know more than you do or know better than you do. And as an organizer, guess what? You got to learn how to deal with them too. So I thank you all for doing the work you do. I cannot express how absolutely impressed and proud of you that I am. I've honestly being in BAP and working with the people that I've been really blessed to work with, I've been richly blessed by these folks, these people who are 20 years, 30 years younger than me, have not lived as long as I have, and are sharper than anybody I know, other than Abdus. So nobody gets to. So thank you all so much for joining me on 2 shows today. I really appreciate it. Happy International Working Women's Day to you all in the chat. And as always, be good to each other, be good to yourselves. And, aluta continua, the struggle continues. But I promise, if you keep struggling and if you don't give up, Victoria acerta, victory is certain. Thanks, y'all. See y'all next time. Peace.